All right, well, let's kick off this webinar. Welcome everyone to our webinar. This is the second webinar in our Nature Action Playbook series entitled Build the Business Case for Nature Step by Step. My name is Megan Pillsbury. I'm the founder and CEO of Dunia Analytics, and I'm joined today by our two primary presenters. My colleague, Rebecca Stern, Chief Science Officer at Dunia Analytics, and Steve Rocklin, CEO and founder of Impact ROI. I would like to take this opportunity to make a quick introduction of Dunia Analytics. We make it easy for companies to incorporate nature into business decision-making and climate transition planning. Our enterprise SaaS platform supports in-house sustainability teams with the tools and data to uncover hidden risks associated with biodiversity and nature loss, meet ESG reporting requirements, and build the business case for nature action. As I mentioned, this is the second webinar in our Nature Action Playbook series. This webinar is focused on building the business case for nature for any organization. In our third webinar, which is scheduled for the 19th of November, we will discuss how you can use your nature assessment to build a bottom-up, strategy-backed nature targets. Registration for our third webinar is live, so you can use the QR code to sign up. And if you missed our first webinar, you can now view on our website or use the QR code to be taken directly to the page. For this webinar, we'll have about 45 minutes of presentation and plenty of time for Q&A. Please submit your questions via the Q&A button on the Zoom navigation. There's a lot of excellent information included in the slides as well that will be presented. We will be sharing both the slides and the recording of this webinar after the session. Once again, my name is Megan Pillsbury. I'm the founder and CEO of Dunia Analytics. I have a background in high-tech sustainability and climate risk. Most recently, I built the business development team for a climate risk analytics startup that was acquired by S&P Global. Our main presenters today are Dr. Rebecca Stern, Chief Science Officer of Dunia Analytics. Rebecca is a forest ecologist with a decade of experience in nature and climate change research and application. She has deep expertise in quantifying corporate nature risk in line with global regulations and frameworks such as the CSRD, TNFD, and science-based targets for nature. Rebecca has worked with companies across industries to assess nature risk throughout their value chain. At Dunia Analytics, her mission is to ensure the scientific integrity of our platform and its alignment with established methodologies, and to maintain the transparency of its methods in an easily understandable way. Rebecca holds a master's degree in science education and a PhD in natural resources. Also joining us is Steve Rocklin. Steve is founder and CEO of Impact ROI, which helps organizations achieve superior social, environmental, and financial performance. Steve has over 25 years of experience in sustainability, ESG, corporate responsibility, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and social impact. He has advised leading companies across a wide variety of industry sectors on how to improve sustainability performance in a way that drives competitive success. Steve is co-author of 2 books and is a fellow of the Governance and Sustainability Center of the Conference Board. Steve obtained his MPP from the Harvard University Kennedy School of Government and his AB from Brown University. Welcome, Steve. Thank you for joining us. All right, with that, Rebecca, I pass the mic to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Megan, and thanks to everyone who's joining us today or who will watch the recording later on. So here's our agenda for today, and we've broken it down into 4 steps. The first step is setting a nature foundation. The second step is setting a company foundation, which includes 3 parts: getting to know your organization more deeply, understanding sustainability archetypes to know what your levers are, and the intersection of business challenges and nature. Step 3 is conducting a nature risk and opportunity assessment, and step 4 is connecting all the dots. We also have 2 cheat sheets, which we're calling them. The first is the general business case for nature action, and the second is to help start drafting an initial plan. Again, please feel free to put questions in the Q&A, and let's get started. So how do you build the business case for nature action? And where do you start, especially if you don't have obvious support for nature initiatives? During this webinar, we'll be talking about the business priority trajectory and the sustainability trajectory, and finding the places that overlap in your particular organization and leveraging that for meaningful nature investment. We've been working with and speaking to dozens of nature leads and sustainability managers, and we have digested these discussions into steps that you can take and use in your organization. The first step is a nature foundation, educating yourself about your industry and nature. Eventually, nature risk and opportunity assessment needs to be bottom up, but first, you want to have a foundational understanding of your sector's relationship with nature. Many resources already exist on this, such as the TNFD's sector guidance and Business for Nature's sector actions towards a nature positive future. These publications describe the main impacts and dependency of your sector on nature and the priority actions that businesses can take. And we put the QR codes here so you can easily scan them. Here's an example with the chemical sector. The sector guidance identifies impacts, dependencies, and potential actions that are specific to this sector. Impacts include pollution and chemical runoff, water use, and land use change. Dependencies include freshwater, biomass provisioning, such as for energy production, and mineral resources. And some clear actions are to improve water stewardship and recycle chemicals. Keeping this information in mind for the next step when you're having conversations with business leaders about the organization can help you begin to identify where synergies may exist. So step 2, as I mentioned in our agenda, has 3 parts. The first step is to get to know your organization more deeply. You need to understand your company to make a compelling business case. If you describe nature as separate, then it will seem like a distraction from business priorities, such as cost reduction, operational efficiency, and increasing revenue. But instead, if you lean into a business priority, you can show how nature can help deliver better outcomes for the business. This is the foundation to frame your nature strategy around. To learn more about the business, schedule time to talk to leaders and stakeholders who can describe the business priorities of the organization, where the money is flowing into the organization right now, plans to develop or launch new products, product updates, new locations being built, new business lines being set up, existing business lines being expanded, and your own teams or divisions' priorities and goals. Even if you already know this, it's worth revisiting for clarity. You can also learn this information from what leadership communicates externally, such as through investor calls or reports, and also internally. Start crafting a clear picture of your organization's business priorities. In a subsequent step, you will align this with initial sustainability priorities. Sustainability initiatives are great, of course, but they have to be done in the context of financial outcomes. You need to find ways that contribute and enhance the financial outcomes. This is the science and art of building the case for nature action. The next step is to figure out your company's sustainability archetype or archetypes. And for this, I'm going to pass the mic and the screen to Steve.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. I really, really appreciate it. Give me a moment just to do battle with Zoom. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Rebecca and Megan, thank you so much for inviting me to be here. Sorry, Zoom is just throwing questions at me. Really, really happy to be here. Really happy to talk about the sustainability archetypes. You've heard a little bit about Impact ROI. We are a full service ESG and sustainability consulting firm. And our whole raison d'etre is to connect the dots between financial performance, environmental. This research was done with our colleagues at Sandbar Solutions, also a great sustainability and ESG advisory firm. Now, the research that we're going to share with you today has actually been shared and published by Trellis. I tell you what, Megan and Rebecca, if you forgive me, I'm going to go off video because my Wi-Fi and Zoom sometimes don't get along when I'm presenting. So I'll make it easier this way. I'll continue. So this has been published on Trellis. We can follow up and send the link to the full report. The question that we were trying to answer in our research is, as we start to see sustainability under fire, there's a backlash now that's been building for really 3 years, but started last year. How are companies able to respond? How should we think about setting sustainability from the full environment, social, and governance perspective? How should we think about setting sustainability strategy? How are the best organizations doing this? We approached the research by interviewing close to 4 dozen chief sustainability officers or their equivalent, mostly from US and European based companies working globally from a variety of industries. We supplemented that with academic research and research from respected organizations. What we came up with was surprising and fascinating to us. And that is that we saw a number of companies that were struggling during this moment and a handful that were not. And what unlocked the difference for us was was a concept that comes from academic businesses in MBA programs that they call tension management. Now, tension management is not about managing our anxiety, although Lord knows that is certainly very, very important. Tension management in the business academic world really focuses on how leaders and decision makers are able to balance and make trade-offs between short-term considerations and long-term considerations, and increasingly balance and make trade-offs between economic, environmental, and social considerations. And what the research told us was that companies that are very, very effective at balancing these tensions tend to outperform their competitors in the market. Focus in on understanding the dynamics of tension management in a sustainability context. And our research talks about 5 steps that leaders engage in terms of strategic sustainability tension management. Today, we want to focus on step 2, which is focusing on archetypes. Now, when we talk about archetypes, we have to realize and connect to some very fascinating research that shows that when leaders, particularly in the C-suite, start thinking about sustainability, they often turn off their rational and logical brains and really think emotionally. When they think emotionally, very often those emotions can be somewhat negative. They can be more related to anxiety or cynicism or questioning, rather than they can be embracing. Sometimes the emotions are positive, but when they're positive, they're not necessarily constructive. They're more about tugging on the heartstrings rather than thinking in a more disciplined business way. Very often, leaders, not only leaders, but members of sustainability teams as well, and the entire employee population will lean into and use a variety of archetypes to answer the question in their own head about why is it that our company engages in sustainability in the first place. And this could be a very confusing question, particularly for those who've been trained on conventional business disciplines and conventional MBA type programs, where environmental and social considerations can feel like a square peg trying to get into the round hole of strategic disciplines, finance disciplines, marketing, sales, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what are these archetypes? There are more than 6, but there are 6 which we tend to find are most common. I'm going to start with, I'm going to get to the box checker last. I'm going to start with brand and reputation driven. Brand and reputation driven is a sense, an emotional reaction to sustainability in a C-suite or member of any part of a company. Think about what your own archetype is as I talk about these. So if we focus on the C-suite right now, we can say that brand and reputation is really about a sort of a logic that says the reason we do sustainability is actually related to public relations. It's where a more sophisticated person will sometimes say it's related to our brand asset and building our reputation asset. Others will say it's more about PR. And that's fundamentally the reason why we do this. Now, if we think about companies that really emphasize the brand and reputation archetype, there are several that come to mind. I would pick Starbucks, which is really effective and strategic, has been really effective and strategic. If you walk into most stores today, you will still see signage that talk about their programs, making sure that small farmers around the world are treated well, and embracing and adopting good environmental and social practices at the farm level. You can see a number of other signage that they provide that makes it seem as if your experience at Starbucks is wrapped into their commitment for environmental and social sustainability. There are others that do this well. Unilever classically has no daylight between their marketing team function and sustainability. Now, this can be very, very powerful, but if we're in a moment right now where there's tons of backlash coming on sustainability, this can become somewhat problematic because companies right now have found a chilling effect. They don't want to talk about sustainability, they don't want to promote it. And if the core archetype, if in your gut you understand the reason to do sustainability in the first place, that your company's brand and reputation aligned, well, then you're actually kind of cowed at this moment and you're asking yourself a question, well, what's the point of doing sustainability if we can't promote it? So that becomes a big source of tension. Let's go right below it on the screen to the one underneath, and that's impact and purpose focused. This is a classic archetype that most individuals who work in sustainability for their profession lean into. And the idea here is that we do sustainability to actually change the world. We want to improve what's going on in the world. We want to benefit environment. We want to and if we think about a company that is sort of the arc of the exemplar of this, we can look at Patagonia. Patagonia, which actually does a wonderful job in terms of connecting the dots between an impact and purpose-driven mission and agenda that comes right from their founder and CEO, and also connecting the dots with brand and reputation driven so that they use this to actually help drive sales. So we can actually see that it's possible to have more than one archetype. Generally, a company will have a dominant archetype, a secondary, maybe even a tertiary archetype. So impact and purpose driven is key. We can see that there's tension here because very often sustainability teams lean into this archetype. And if they're dealing with C-suite executives who have more business-aligned archetypes, sometimes there can be friction in the way that we fundamentally talk about sustainability. A sustainability team that will say, come on, don't you understand we have to do this? We have to adopt everything. We have to adopt the TNFD. We have to adopt TCFD. We have to focus on water. We have to focus on deforestation. We have to do everything and all these things and everything at the maximum right now. And that can create a lot of stress and tension with C-suites that may have different archetypes. Let's go to the right side. Immediate returns driven. That's where generally this will come from C-suite leaders who will say the only reason that we do sustainability is the only reason that we do anything at this business, and that is that it must support profitability. It must support EBITDA. It must support financial performance, bottom line, top line growth. Whatever it is, it's got to support that. Now, in our research, what we found was something fascinating, was that C-suite leaders, sustainability leaders, actually found that this was scary. This was a scary archetype to adopt initially. However, they have grown to love it. And the reason is that it's enormously clear what they need to do. If they can come in and make a very strong business case, they get all the resources and support from the C-suite that they could ever hope for. If they can't make that business case, they don't get the support and they don't get to proceed with. It's very clear. They know where they stand. They find that with some of the other archetypes, it can be unclear. So immediate returns has some things to argue for it. Underneath that is innovation driven. Innovation driven says the reason why we do sustainability is because it's going to help us change who we are as a company. It might change the products and services that we would provide. If we think about innovation-driven companies, we can think about that adopt this archetype. We can think about chemical companies like BASF, which has adopted a bogey as the phrase of 24 billion euros of sales of sustainability-related solutions that they have created. They've met that target, and they're in the process of creating an even higher target for sustainability solution-related sales. So this is innovation that they're trying to drive into the company. Tech companies are often have innovation driven as an archetype. We can think about innovation at the product level. We can also think about innovation at the business model level. So we can think about companies that begin to say, we want to start adopting a complete circular approach to our supply and value chain. The interesting thing about innovation is what is the time frame? If a company is adopting an innovation for 3 to 5 years, that's really interesting. If they're adopting an innovation time frame related to sustainability of 30 and 40 years, maybe that's not so exciting. So we have to really look here at what time frame we're adopting. Let's go to the left side of the chart and go to risk reduction. Risk reduction is actually something that we felt in the past has been an archetype that would have been rather unstrategic, but it's become very, very strategic in the current time frame. So this is going to be a company that's saying, look, the reason we do sustainability is to address and mitigate risks. In the past, these risks would have been reputation risks. They would have been license to operate risks. But increasingly, leading companies say, no, we see a connection between sustainability and financial and market-based risk. Now, the last and sometimes least archetype is the box checker. The box checker is a decision maker who says the only reason why we do this is to check the box. We do only what we have to do and not an inch more. Now, if the box checker is the dominant archetype, this can be really challenging. If there's any time for Q&A, we can talk about how to handle a box checker. However, if it's a secondary or tertiary archetype, it's not necessarily a bad thing. And that is that when we look at sustainability, sustainability is ever changing. We have not agreed as a field of what the definition for sustainability is. You will hear dozens of different kinds of definitions of sustainability that are used in the corporate context. Box checker can be helpful for helping a company manage the amorphous blob that can be sustainability and understanding that there are some things to do which we have to do for hygiene purposes, but really we just need to check the box on those. And we have to focus on more material issues and be more strategic and apply more resources to those. So these are the 6 major archetypes. Now, how do we use them? So what we've started to do and encourage companies to do is to actually map sustainability archetypes. We suggest mapping them at the enterprise level because the enterprise level is really important because that's going to set the agenda for the entire business and the way really the entire business thinks. However, there will be archetypes, different archetypes for specific business lines. So we might have enterprise dominant archetype sitting side by side, a different archetype mapping for, let's say, the supply chain team, or let's say a particular business line. We also should map the archetypes for the sustainability team and see if they align with the enterprise or see if they align with other teams. Because there, what we'll be able to do is we'll be able to identify tension, conflict, and friction. And particularly for the sustainability team, we'll be able to identify and have an epiphany of understanding why is it that sometimes we are able to communicate with decision makers and others in the business, and they get what we're trying to do and embrace it 100%. And sometimes we communicate and they look like we have 17 heads and they don't understand what we're talking about. And this our archetype mapping process allows us to do that. Oh my God, our dominant archetype, let's say, is brand and reputation. There are some other archetypes. We keep coming in with an impact and purpose agenda and framing. They don't get what we're talking about. It could also mean that sometimes we try and be clever, too clever for our own good, and we come in and start talking about immediate returns archetypes, when in fact, what our bosses want to hear is more about risk reduction. So they're not responding well. I'll give an example from experience we had working with a company, working with Walt Disney. We came in ourselves doing some work for them several years ago, trying to make a business case for sustainability. And we focused on immediate returns driven, particularly related to sales. The C-suite was unmoved. We could not understand why they were yawning at us. And finally, they explained to us that the dominant interest that they had was brand and reputation. If we could come in and show how sustainability helped their brand, they would support whatever recommendation we were making. If we were talking about sales, they're much less interested. And it was like, okay, no big whoop. So we have to understand how these archetypes work when then this can lean into how we communicate and engage and make persuasive arguments for the type of things we're starting to do, whether it's related to nature, whether it's related to other aspects of sustainability. Another good thing to do is to say, look, archetypes should not be static and fixed. If we don't like the archetypes, the dominant archetypes that our companies have, another thing that we should do is start mapping what is the ideal framing for our company and our business. This is one that we did for a particular business. It will be different for certain kinds of different businesses. For Walt Disney, brand is one of their key performance business indicators. So therefore, we would want brand and reputation driven to be high on this list. For another company that we were working on, in this example, move the company from what was more of a box checking mode into more of a mode in which they see immediate return driven should be the dominant archetype, followed by innovation. The other thing that can help is putting this against our materiality exercises. I know that right now CSRD is going through a lot of changes. There are even negotiations right now between the US and Europe about the application of CSRD. But what we're finding is, and the EU's own research has borne this out, is that the early adopters of CSRD have been engaging in double materiality exercises, and they have been identifying way too many issues as material. There's one famous car company that we've done some work with that adopted over 100 issues and topics as material. That's too much. One of the things that we can do is applying the archetypes to the materiality exercises helps a company understand and frame what's truly a priority and what's more of a hygiene issue. A hygiene issue is something that should be managed and addressed, but more in a box checking type way. So this can be very helpful here. So when we start looking at the application, here's a real life example from a big manufacturing company that's in the transportation sector. And what we found is we can start to create this kind of tension map. By going through the archetype process, what we found is that there were certain leaders and C-suite executives who were looking at sustainability, and sustainability was making them incredibly anxious because they were in a situation in which there was a down business cycle that needed a turnaround moment for this company, and that needed to be the focus. So if we weren't talking about immediate returns, they did not want to listen at all. There were other executives and so the sustainability team who were saying, look, we're leaning into more sustainable solutions that we're bringing into the marketplace. If we don't focus on this and don't focus on that brand archetype, we're going to be seen as being hypocritical and greenwashing. So there was a tension there on one axis. The resulting solution set and strategy, there was a tension on the bottom of the sort of y-axis here of those C-suite executives who were saying, look, we just need to make a good product and bring it to market. If it's got electrification in it, that's all we need to do as far as sustainability is concerned. Versus other executives and decision makers who are saying, what we need to do is put sustainability at the core of everything we do, from production and manufacturing to marketing to the solutions we have. We could see where that tension map is. And what we started to do is to say, look, as a strategy, what we need to do is really focus on the fact that you're in a down business cycle. We need to emphasize making a good product, but we need to understand that there are certain material issues, commitment to climate, a commitment to responsible supply chain, a commitment to nature and biodiversity that is non-negotiable, that has to be part of making a good product, part of our marketing, a part of how we differentiate ourselves in the marketplace and how we win. And so that is an example of how the tension map is applied and the decisions that this company is now leaning into for its sustainability and business strategy. I'll end here, but I'll mention right now that this webinar is about the business case. Impact ROI has just launched. It's blowing up right now on LinkedIn. A huge amount of interest. Hot off the presses, launched last Thursday. Our new business case report is called Project ROI. You can download it from our website, or I can provide Megan and Rebecca the link for all of you, that actually proves out the business case for sustainability, shows that those who adopt sustainable practices and do it well actually boost their firm value by 36%, boost their profitability by 21%, boost their share price by 6%, and can boost their sales by as much as 20%. There are other quantitative factors which go into it, and the report also talks about how companies need to make and deliver that business case for sustainability. So that is what I wanted to share with you today. Thank you so much again to Dunya Analytics. Really appreciate it. And if there's time for Q&A, I can be here. If you're going back to the agenda, no problem. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I think we're going to do Q&A at the end. So yeah, so that would be great. I'm sure we'll have some. I'm going to share again. Great. So yeah, Steve, that was incredibly informative. And we're going to link to those archetypes to different potential actions in a minute. So thank you again. All right, so seeding us back into our agenda, the next part of step 2 is to identify the intersection of business challenges and nature. So now you have an initial understanding of the main environmental concerns of your industry, and then also a solid understanding of your company's priorities and archetypes. You can start identifying where is the intersection of addressing business challenges and environmental issues. So in the chemicals industry example, decreased water use can help reduce costs. Developing chemical recycling capabilities can increase operational efficiency, and developing green chemistry product lines could increase revenue. So now we're going to take this concept and see what it could look like for each of the sustainability archetypes. For a few of the archetypes, we're using the example of a textiles company with high water use. Knowing that water consumption is a known nature impact in your industry, your goal as the sustainability manager is to identify the sites with the greatest water risk and find ways to reduce water use. Water risk refers to the combination of high water use in areas of water scarcity that are also biodiversity sensitive. Yeah, so I said we were going to go through the archetypes, but we're not going to focus on the impact and purpose focus category since they're likely to need less convincing. So we're going to focus on the other 5. So for the box checker archetype, you want to use the box checking mindset as an entry point to get leaders invested in more substantive nature positive work. You can draw on the information you learned about your company and see where this archetype also overlaps with others. Because you're going to need to find like another entry point as well. So do leaders also have an efficiency optimization mindset, or does competitive advantage drive them? Like Steve mentioned, the multiple archetypes, or there's the main archetype or secondary or tertiary, so you can kind of bring those all together. So as an entry point, you can leverage external standards, all the external standards, requirements, or frameworks that can create a clear completion rather than just open-ended sustainability goals. So I have some examples of entry points and then also some hypothetical quotes that could be spoken by a sustainability manager. So I'll read those as you follow along. So if you fall within the scope of the CSRD, of course, you're required to disclose your water risk data. Other entry points include customer or supplier requirements. So to stay on a certain supplier list, we need to demonstrate water efficiency improvements. Financial reporting categories. We can categorize this as operational efficiency spending rather than sustainability overhead. Audit preparedness. When investors or customers audit our sustainability practices, we'll have documented water treatment processes and metrics ready to present. If leadership is also driven by cost reduction, then you could point to cost reduction opportunities. I've used that same data to identify cost reduction opportunities through water reuse systems. For the risk reduction driven archetype, you can focus on areas of water risk where your operations or major suppliers exist. Research the financial impact of the loss of water, and you can show how water treatment and reuse can reduce operational costs, prevent business interruptions, and prevent lost revenue. So an example, A manufacturing facility in Chennai requires 8,000 liters of water daily, has extremely high water stress, and is near an important ecosystem. Um, with India's, and then you can point to an emerging regulation, with India's new liquid management rules requiring 60% wastewater reuse by 2027. Without this infrastructure, we'd face regulatory penalties, plus potential production shutdowns. And then you can lean into a water treatment system that you identified, and then show how this can reduce costs. New environmental regulations are emerging across the globe, and so staying up to date on these can help you speak to a risk reduction driven leader. For the immediate returns driven archetype, water treatment and reuse can provide immediate returns in terms of savings. So lead with speed and numbers. Here's an example of efficiency systems and their payback. Water efficiency retrofits often deliver the fastest sustainability return on investment. Simple fixes like high efficiency nozzles and leak detection systems can reduce water costs by 15 to 25% within the first month, and with payback periods of 6 to 18 months. Then you can stack this with other immediate benefits like reducing energy costs for water heating and pumping, or potentially qualifying for utility rebates. And you can also show the immediate returns for that. For this archetype, brand and reputation driven, and the next, we are presenting examples from existing companies, and Steve gave some examples as well, so great to build on that. In the case of brand and reputation, there's both the risk angle and the opportunity angle. So here's a B2B example, Innolex. Innolex is a supplier to large cosmetic companies. Building on several actions that they had previously taken towards sustainability, these included certifying ingredients with recognized global standards for natural and sustainable cosmetics. They rebranded themselves in 2022 to position themselves to provide products for the sustainable economy through their messaging. They also had recently divested divisions of the company so that they were focusing exclusively on ingredients for beauty care and personal care. They saw the opportunity to brand themselves as the supplier of sustainable beauty products, and they leaned into that. Their CEO has described how the company challenges itself to think differently to invent the future of ingredient platforms. So for Innolex, sustainability is a differentiator. And now the companies they supply to can make their own sustainability claims, and this drives major value for their customers. This is an example of seizing the opportunity. However, if you don't take action, there's also a risk to the reputation and the brand. So if your company is brand and reputation driven, find the ways that nature can add value to the brand. And if you're a B2B, there may be room to be a provider and become a preferred supplier. You can build your brand to support other companies who are looking for or who need sustainable suppliers. And this is only going to become more critical as the CSRD is rolled out. Even if it is limited in its scope, it's still going to be super important for suppliers, for those large companies within scope of CSRD to have suppliers that are fully sustainable. Another example of brand and reputation driven is Tony's Chocolonely, which is a chocolate manufacturer. This company is leaning fully into triple bottom line communication for consumers, as you can see here on the chocolate scorecard, which ranks chocolate companies in various ESG categories. Tony's was founded in 2005 on ending exploitation in the chocolate industry. So this archetype also overlaps with the impact and purpose focused archetype. This company has been named as the most sustainable Dutch brand for 6 years in a row, based on the Sustainable Brand Index, which interestingly measures consumer perceptions of a brand's sustainability and not its actual performance. And Tony's was named most sustainable, even though the company isn't perfectly achieving its goals. In 2021, they were removed from the list of slave-free chocolate producers because Tony's had found that there were hundreds of cases of child labor in its supply chain. This was due to the company working with a large cocoa processor and manufacturer, Barry Callebaut. But the company has said that they're consciously working with engaging this supplier because they want to show that it is possible to be fully traceable while working with a major processor. So their branding and then also their transparency around that is adding value to the company. For the innovation-driven archetype. For this archetype, setting environmental goals can spark breakthrough product innovations. So one example is L'Oreal. One of their most challenging sustainability targets that they've set for themselves is to shift away from petroleum-based chemicals. These are commonly found in beauty products because they can hydrate and combine ingredients. To the goal of sourcing 95% of its formulations from plant-derived, mineral, or recycled sources by 2030. They have an eco-design strategy, and this inspired a new perfume made with fragrance collected from flowers using a water-free extraction system. That's what's shown here in the photo. These goals also drove the refinement of a vertical farm system that lets L'Oreal cultivate plants for its cosmetics using less land, less water, and less energy. Both of these innovations also address another L'Oreal goal, which is to use recycled water for 100% of its industrial processes. Their CSO, Marissa McGowan, sums it up by describing how sustainability is synonymous with innovation. So for inspiration and evidence, conduct research on companies in your industry who have met innovation challenges and turned them into new products and opportunities. Another example comes from a leader we heard from at last year's New York City Climate Week. At Apple, designers and engineers were tasked to build a MacBook that was net zero, nature neutral, could not cost more than the current product, and could not compromise the user experience. Basically, they had to create the same product or better that doesn't do any damage to the environment. And the story we heard from this leader was that the designers and engineers at Apple were really energized by this prospect, took the challenge and went off and successfully built it. So now we've gone through some examples and hypothetical examples of all the archetypes. And one thing that I wanted to highlight is no matter which archetypes you're working with, remember that communication is a skill and one that can be intentionally built. Driving meaningful change depends on your ability to communicate with clarity, confidence, and purpose. You want to learn to speak the internal language of each team because different teams have different ways of communicating. And when you do this, speak their language, you likely won't get it right the first time, but just keep going. You'll eventually get the hang of it. You can also take a course to specifically build skills in effective communication around sustainability. One example is the Dialogue for Change program by the UN Global Compact Network UK. And this is designed to support those in the organization that are responsible for sustainability performance to mobilize action across departments. It helps with building the interpersonal skills needed to effectively communicate and engage with colleagues and stakeholders and build that internal buy-in. So we have discussed a general sector impacts and dependencies. And at this point, it's a good time to get more specific on the risks and opportunities tailored to your business. This is step 3. At this point, of course, you may still be building your business case for nature, and you may not have support to conduct a full nature risk and opportunity assessment. But you can conduct a nature assessment across all your sites, even if you have limited resources. The 4 insights to keep in mind while doing this are to start with your direct operations, screen your sites using global and industry level data sets. Many are freely available. Take steps that you can build on later, and consider the many ways that nature adds value to the business, which is a big part of today's conversation. But for a deeper dive into completing a nature assessment with limited resources, please do check out our first webinar. That was titled Nature Risk Assessment for Small Teams and Small Budgets, where we go into that much more deeply. We also invite you to sign up for free on our platform. It takes less than 5 minutes to sign up and assess your first site. Our platform is the most comprehensive TNFD-aligned nature intelligence platform available. It combines all the data sets you need in our proprietary risk methodology to instantly screen for impact and dependency risk. You can scan the QR code to get started right after the session. All right, our step 4, our last step, is to connect the dots. You want to lean into initiatives where your company is already spending money. Provide evidence of how, if you add nature, you can add additional value. You want to go where the resources are already flowing. Like we talked about this at the beginning a little bit. Is there a new facility being built or planned? Since you've now conducted your nature risk and opportunity assessment, where you can focus on your most material dependency or impacts and bring that in to see how it connects with, in this case, the new facility. So just as an example, perhaps one of the easiest areas to do this is with climate, where you can have a double benefit for climate and nature, and where there, of course, might be additional carbon benefits if you implement nature-based solutions. So let's say in this new facility, your company has the goal, or one of the goals, or in an existing facility, to reduce energy use. So of course, we hear about planting trees that can provide shade and reduce energy costs. The time span depends on where it's located and which species are planted. But if you've quantified for nature risk and opportunity, how much land your company has converted from natural to non-natural, or how much land your company purchased that had already been converted over the past 5 years, then planting these trees can have added biodiversity benefits, and you can measure those. Another example is the water energy nexus. If your industry has high water use and is also looking to reduce emissions, then you can find solutions that increase water efficiency. So this way it addresses one of the biggest nature impacts your company is having and also helps the company meet its climate goals. Thinking about these, where this nexus is, it's important to also think about things holistically. And that way you won't be blindsided by trade-offs. For example, in 2021, Lego pledged to begin selling bricks from recycled plastic within 2 years. However, they learned that using recycled plastic would have led to higher carbon emissions. So they had to abandon that plan for something else, but they still have pledged to make the bricks from sustainable materials by 2032. But of course, when you're presenting these ideas, you do need to see the whole picture. All right, so now we have our 2 cheat sheets. Our first one is some business case bullet points that can apply to any company in any industry. So nature action can provide value through cost savings. So we talked about this a little bit, but being resourceful by identifying which sustainability investments will yield the highest returns. This will prevent wasteful spending on initiatives that may not address material risks. There's a risk reduction and proactive management, and community engagement provides value here as well. When it comes to local operations, having a positive relationship with local government is huge. It increases the ease of doing business and access to government resources. In addition, it provides value through employee engagement. Employees report higher job satisfaction and retention in companies with leading sustainability programs, identification of nature opportunities, and access to green financing. Interestingly, a recent study described that companies that qualify for green financing outperform, and this is actually due to a lower cost of capital. Our second cheat sheet has guiding questions to help you advance in each of the stages we've talked about. So for the Nature Foundation, which nature impacts and dependencies are you already aware of for your industry? And which resources are you most interested to check out? For the Company Foundation, what is your list of leaders and stakeholders that you need to speak to gain a firmer understanding of your organization? And based on these leaders, which archetypes do you think you're working with in your company? Or which dominant, secondary, or tertiary archetypes exist? And this also links back to the archetype map that Steve described, which would be a great piece to do at this point. Then connecting the dots. You can list existing initiatives that you're already aware of, and then, of course, expand this list after your conversations with leaders and stakeholders. Research areas of potential cost savings from efficiencies, and also examples of competitors who have a marketing advantage from sustainable products. And then nature risk and opportunity assessment. You can start collecting business location information. If you've done a climate risk, if the company has done a climate risk assessment, you can use the information from that to find the location. So in summary, you want to start with the nature foundation for your industry, build knowledge about your company, conduct a nature and risk and opportunity assessment. Reminder, you can check out our platform for free to do that, and then connect all the dots. So thank you so much. Now it looks like we do have a few minutes for Q&A.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Steve. Feel free to, if you have questions, to drop them into the Q&A, and we can spend a couple of minutes to respond to those. I had a question for Steve. Just was curious because we've chatted a little bit, but I think it's the first time kind of seeing each other's content. And I was curious because you did mention a few things, like what a lot of the guidance that you provided was around like how to think about the organization, how to map kind of across the leadership. But if you're looking to kind of influence leadership, like let's say you're in the sustainability team, but not the chief sustainability officer, do you see like leveraging these sustainability archetypes in this way to make the business case? And have you seen examples of that working in a particular situation?
Megan, absolutely, and thank you so much. I appreciate it. So one of the things that, I'll give a live example that's there are too many examples to name, but I'll give a live one that's just fresh on my mind that a company that we've been working with again in the mobility and transportation sector. You had a classic situation in which you had a sustainability team that we mapped their archetypes, and no big surprise there. It was impact and purpose driven all the way. Um, and so, as you could imagine, when they started to talk with their CFO and their CEO and some of the more powerful leaders and decision makers in the business, there was starting to become real tension and friction because the CEO and CFO and others were certainly committed to sustainability, would include in their speeches. And the sustainability team was sort of over-eager and enthusiastic and sort of felt that everything that they were coming to them with, that they were going to be supported. So if they started to come sort of with a TNFD type angle, they felt like, of course, our C-suite's going to embrace it. And what they found is they started getting pushback on this. Meetings started getting canceled. Sometimes it was overt, sometimes it's sort of the subtle way that decision makers, they started feeling deprioritized and shifted and shunted down. They found that their leaders were starting to get a little bit sharp and saying, why do we have to do this? And who's saying we have to do this? What's cost going to be? And so when we started to map the other archetypes and revealed that, we had leaders that themselves were sort of a mix. Some of them had impact and purpose as their dominant archetypes. Some had immediate returns. Um, uh, we started to say, look, we got to start changing the way you approach them, and we've got to start saying we can't go for an across the board scaled up 0 to 100 miles an hour in 1 second type of approach. We got to focus on some of the nature-based solutions that are most relevant, most material, and that can make the best business case. Water was a clear area in some particular operational contexts. There were others. And we started to frame this and saying, look, we see real opportunity that if we can adopt some good practices, it'll be an investment up front. We see that there'll be a payback period of X number of years. Maybe that's not exactly the kind of payback period you expect, but if we look at this from sort of an R&D type of standpoint, if we have a 3 to 4 year payback here, we think the return on investment will be very strong, very competitive with our own internal hurdle rates, worth the investment, and it will also help on a number of other areas in terms of taking the heat off some other risks. And when you start having that kind of conversation, the the we participated in some of these conversations, and you could see just in the body language alone of these C-suite leaders how they relaxed, how they engaged, and their response was to say, "This is sounding great. It's making sense. I'm going to put you together with some of my top people on this. I want you involved in this working group, that working group. Get engaged in this. Come with a specific proposal and cost it out in a plan." In 2 weeks, that's the type of dynamic that it starts to open up. Is that useful?
Yeah, and I think kind of one of the takeaways that I have from that is like you need to figure out what drives the individual decision makers and how to lean into what they prioritize to get them on board. And it may not be like one argument for everyone across the organization, right? It depends on like who you need to get on board to that project that you need to figure out what they care about. Thank you for that. And we do have a question from Kiku. So thanks for this practical webinar. You use the example of site level analysis. However, many companies do not have a significant physical footprint, but more of an impact via external suppliers. How do you suggest we slice the analysis in the case of this company, this type of company, by product line, by business unit, by impact area? Thanks. Rebecca, do you want to take that one? You're on mute.
Yes, thank you. It's a really good point that the biggest impacts for many companies are going to be in the supply chain. And so again, if you're talking about starting with like a limited scope for that first nature and risk and opportunity assessment. So one thing you want to do is look at the industry, like we mentioned at the beginning, look at what are the major impacts for your industry. Another resource that's not on there, but that's part of it is looking at the high impact commodities list. The Science-Based Targets for Nature has a high impact commodities list. So you could look at product lines that are using the high impact commodities or that use those the most. That could be one way to start. Or you can break it down by business unit. Like the Science-Based Targets for Nature they say you can use that approach if you're just getting started to focus on one business unit or one area of the business if it's not necessarily direct operations. But yeah, Megan, Steve, please feel free to add as well.
No, that was a great answer. The supply chain definitely gets trickier. There's some companies have their impacts upstream in the supply chain, and some have them downstream in how their customers or their customers' customers use their products. So exactly to Rebecca's point, like start with the industry, look upstream and downstream across your organization, and then you'll need to come up with a strategy of like, how do we address that something that may not be fully in our control, because there are mechanisms of influence. Obviously, downstream, you can just think about how the users use your products and can you make them more circular? Can you make them compostable, right? Whatever the outcome might be there. If you're looking upstream from your suppliers, it's around supplier engagement and how can you provide them the resources or the education that they need to transform to become a level of sustainable that you're then comfortable with having in your supply chain. So that's a big one to unpack. Kiku, thank you for your question. All right, we're at time. So we're going to need to wrap this webinar. Thank you, Rebecca and Steve. Those were incredible presentations. As a reminder, we will be sharing the recording and the slides, and we'll also send an invitation to our next and final webinar in this series. If you'd like to further explore our platform and how can it support your nature assessment, please reach out to us by replying to any of our emails or visiting our website. And we will, Steve, please do send that link so we can share your link to your report as well with the recording information. We hope that this webinar has been valuable. Thank you for your time and questions. And thank you again, Rebecca and Steve, for your excellent presentation. That concludes our webinar. Everybody have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.